Russia didn't notice when the Danube stopped being neutral. That's not because anything dramatic happened. No blockade was announced. No Russian ship was sunk. No NATO declaration made headlines. The river kept flowing. Barges still moved. Ports still loaded grain. Maps still looked the same. And that's why this matters. Because the most dangerous shifts in a war don't arrive with explosions. They arrive when something ordinary becomes irreversible. For decades, the Danube was background noise to Moscow, a commercial artery, a legal space, a river governed by treaties and paperwork, not power. Russia planned around coastlines, fleets, and choke points at sea. It obsessed over the Black Sea. It measured control in missiles and ships. While it did that, something quieter was happening inland. The Danube wasn't turning into a battlefield. It was turning into infrastructure Russia could no longer touch, not because anyone challenged Moscow directly, but because the river stopped being optional. Once Russia pressured Ukraine's ports, trade didn't disappear. It rerouted. Once the Black Sea became contested, volume didn't collapse. It moved upstream. And once that happened, the Danube stopped being a river and started behaving like a spine. By the time Moscow realized how much was flowing through it, the corridor was already normalized. Protected, embedded inside NATO territory in a way that stripped Russia of its favorite weapon, ambiguity. Russia didn't lose access, it lost leverage, and the country sitting at the center of that shift wasn't a naval power or a traditional frontline state, it was Romania. Not through escalation, not through confrontation, but through preparation that didn't need to announce itself. Because Romania didn't turn the Danube into a weapon overnight. It turned it into something far worse for Moscow, a system. And once systems lock in, pressure stops working the way Russia needs it to. The war didn't change direction when a shot was fired on the river. It changed when Russia realized it could no longer interfere quietly. That realization didn't arrive with panic. It arrived with hesitation. And hesitation is where control begins to slip. Russia thought pressure at sea would be decisive. That assumption made sense on paper. Control the Black Sea, and you shape Ukraine's economy. Disrupt ports, and you choke exports. Turn maritime access into a risk, and everything downstream begins to strain. For decades, Russian planners treated sea control as the primary lever in this region because it offered visibility, symbolism, and escalation dominance all at once. What they didn't fully account for was substitution. When pressure increased in the Black Sea, trade didn't vanish. It adapted. Routes bent inland. Cargo flows followed geography rather than force. And geography pointed straight toward the Danube. What had once been a secondary artery became essential almost by default. Not through grand strategy, but through necessity. That shift mattered because rivers behave differently than seas. You can posture at sea, you can signal with fleets, you can threaten blockades and make them feel immediate. Rivers don't respond to that logic. They sit inside sovereign territory, layered with law, infrastructure, and routine. Once commerce moves there at scale, interfering becomes less about naval dominance and more about crossing thresholds that are far harder to justify. This is where Russia's leverage began to thin. The Danube flows through multiple NATO states, but it converges operationally inside Romania. Ports like Galați and Brăila weren't designed as emergency alternatives. They were commercial facilities. That's exactly why they worked. By the time Russia understood how much Ukrainian grain, fuel, and material was moving through them, the corridor was already normalized. Insurance adjusted, scheduling stabilized, investments followed. The river stopped being a workaround and started becoming the main route. That transformation created a problem Moscow couldn't solve cleanly. Interfering at sea carries risk, but it's familiar. Interfering on a river that runs through NATO territory turns pressure into provocation instantly. There's no gray zone once drones fall near river ports or infrastructure fragments land across borders. The ambiguity Russia relies on evaporates. And this is where Romania's role becomes decisive. Romania didn't need to declare the Danube strategic. The traffic did that on its own. What Bucharest did instead was accept the implication early. If the river was going to carry the economic weight Russia was trying to crush, then it had to be treated like critical infrastructure, not just commerce. Protection followed logic, not rhetoric. That protection wasn't about militarizing the river in a theatrical sense. It was about ensuring continuity, about making sure the corridor could not be disrupted cheaply, quietly, or deniably. Once that standard is set, the attacker's cost curve changes immediately. Russia could still pressure the Black Sea, it could still threaten ports, but the effects stopped cascading. The Danube absorbed the shock, and that absorption is what turns a tactic into a liability. Every time Russia escalated at sea, it reinforced the importance of a route it could not reach without crossing lines it wanted to avoid. The harder Moscow pushed in one space, the more entrenched the alternative became in another. By the time Russian planners adjusted, the logic had flipped. The Black Sea was no longer the choke point. The Danube was the release valve. And release valves are dangerous for pressure campaigns because they prevent crises from peaking. They bleed off leverage slowly, almost invisibly, until the original threat loses its urgency. This is why Russia didn't see it coming. Not because the Danube was hidden, but because Russia was looking for confrontation, not resilience. And resilience doesn't announce itself. It settles in, becomes routine, and then becomes untouchable. If Russia had seen tanks lining the riverbanks or warships parading up the Danube, it would have reacted immediately. That's the instinct Moscow understands. Visible militarization triggers countermoves, headlines, and escalation ladders everyone recognizes. Romania did none of that, and that restraint is exactly what made the shift effective. The Danube didn't change because it became loud. It changed because it became resilient. Romania treated the river the way modern states treat power grids or data cables, something that must function under stress without drawing attention to itself. Protection didn't arrive as spectacle. It arrived as procedure. Patrol patterns adjusted. Surveillance became continuous rather than episodic. River units that once focused on navigation and customs work began training for an environment where drones, loitering munitions, and precision strikes were no longer theoretical. Nothing about that transformation looked dramatic from the outside. That was the point. The river stayed open, barges kept moving, ports stayed busy. From a distance, it looked like business as usual. But underneath that normality, the operating assumptions changed. The Danube stopped being a soft target simply because it stopped being a target that could be disrupted quietly. Hybrid pressure works when friction is cheap, when disruption can be denied, when the response is slower than the provocation. Romania's approach removed those conditions one by one without ever declaring that it was doing so. Any interference now carries immediate attribution. Any escalation spills across borders instantly. Any attempt to test defenses becomes visible not just to Romania, but to NATO's wider situational picture. That visibility is what matters. Once surveillance and response become routine, attackers lose the advantage of surprise even when they don't intend to strike. A drone flight that wanders too close, a missile that lands short, debris falling into river zones. Each incident now lands in an environment already wired to notice, share, and respond. There is no clean way to pretend it was accidental. Romania understood something Russia underestimated. Rivers don't need to be defended like coastlines. They need to be defended like lifelines. You don't concentrate force. You distribute attention. You don't rely on a single system. You layer presence, redundancy, and readiness until disruption becomes more trouble than it's worth. This is why the Danube didn't turn into a battlefield. Battlefields invite escalation. Infrastructure invites continuity, and continuity is the enemy of pressure. Every week, the river keeps functioning under threat conditions reinforces the same lesson. Russia can still apply force elsewhere, but it cannot collapse the system it hoped would break first. The Danube keeps absorbing pressure and passing it through without amplification. That drains leverage. What makes this especially uncomfortable for Moscow is that there is no moment to respond to, no announcement to denounce, no clear action to punish. The river didn't militarize. It simply stopped being fragile. That forces Russia into an awkward position. Escalate and confirm that NATO territory is being targeted. Hold back and watch a critical artery operate beyond reach. Neither option restores control. And once control is lost at the logistical level, it doesn't come back easily. Logistics shape tempo. Tempo shapes strategy. Strategy shapes outcomes long before battles do. The Danube isn't just moving cargo anymore, it's moving time. And Russia is running out of it in this corridor. The Black Sea was supposed to be Russia's pressure valve, not a battlefield in the traditional sense, but a space where presence alone could shape outcomes. Ships didn't need to fire, aircraft didn't need to cross red lines, drones only needed to be visible. The assumption was simple: as long as Russia could threaten disruption there, everything connected to it would feel unstable. That assumption broke the moment the Danube stopped being fragile. For years, the logic was linear. Apply pressure in the Black Sea and trade downstream would feel it. Insurance would spike, shipping would hesitate, Ukraine's exports would slow, Europe would argue, time would work in Moscow's favor. Romania quietly rewired that equation. Once the Danube corridor proved it could function under threat, Black Sea pressure stopped cascading the way Russia expected. Disruption no longer traveled cleanly from the coast into the continent. It dissipated inland. What used to feel like a choke point turned into a buffer. That shift is subtle, but it's devastating to a strategy built on intimidation. Russia didn't lose the ability to operate in the Black Sea. It lost the ability to turn activity there into leverage elsewhere. Every drone flight, every patrol, every signal now runs into a system that absorbs friction instead of amplifying it. The Black Sea still matters. It just doesn't decide as much anymore. This is where Russia's planners run into a structural wall. Pressure only compounds when it stacks, when one disruption triggers another, when uncertainty spreads faster than reassurance. Romania's Danube posture interrupts that chain. Pressure hits the river system and stops. It doesn't echo deeper into Europe the way it once did. From Moscow's perspective, that's infuriating. Nothing dramatic happened. No blockade was broken in a cinematic moment. No naval defeat forced a rethink. The sea simply stopped delivering the political effects it used to. And because that change arrived without confrontation, there's no obvious response. Escalating in the Black Sea doesn't reopen the river. It risks widening the conflict. Pulling back doesn't restore leverage. It just confirms the loss quietly. This is why the Danube matters more than the coastline right now. Coasts can be threatened. Rivers have to function. Romania's strategy didn't challenge Russia where it was strongest. It made that strength less useful. The Black Sea can still host pressure, but pressure without downstream impact becomes noise. And noise doesn't win wars. That's the moment the balance tilts. Not when a ship is sunk, not when a missile hits, but when an entire theater stops paying dividends. Once that happens, planners start asking uncomfortable questions. If the Black Sea no longer shapes outcomes the way it used to, where does pressure go next? And how much effort is worth spending to maintain a presence that no longer delivers leverage? Those questions don't get answered publicly. They get answered quietly, inside planning rooms with timelines and risk tables that don't lie. And that's where the Danube's transformation begins to matter far beyond Romania. Because rivers don't just carry cargo, they decide which pressures work and which ones expire. This is the point where a lot of people expect a correction, a countermeasure, a show of force, some sharp move that restores balance. That instinct misunderstands the kind of problem Russia is facing here. What Romania has done to the Danube isn't a challenge that can be answered symmetrically. There's no single asset to target, no decisive strike that resets the equation. The river didn't become useful because of one base, one system, or one deployment. It became useful because it was folded into a structure designed to keep working even when stressed. And structures don't flinch when you threaten them. Russia still has tools it could use. It could increase pressure near the delta. It could lean harder on drones and missiles. It could try to signal that no corridor is truly safe. But every one of those options carries a cost that lands in the wrong place. Escalation near the Danube doesn't isolate Romania. It activates NATO attention. It hardens exactly the posture Russia wants to keep soft. The moment pressure becomes visible enough to justify a response, the river stops being a gray zone and starts being treated like protected infrastructure. That's a threshold Moscow has avoided crossing for a reason. Pulling back doesn't solve the problem either. Reducing activity doesn't make the corridor less secure. It just confirms that intimidation no longer pays the way it used to. From a planning perspective, that's almost worse. It means a tool has gone dull without being broken. This is the dilemma denial creates. You can't strike it cleanly. You can't ignore it without consequence. And you can't escalate around it without widening the conflict. So Russia does what pressured systems usually do. It adapts tactically while absorbing strategic loss. Flights get rerouted, timing shifts, pressure becomes less frequent, more cautious, more selective. On paper, capability remains. In practice, leverage shrinks. What makes this especially uncomfortable is that none of it looks like defeat. Maps don't change color, units don't retreat dramatically, statements remain confident. But inside the system, something important has happened. Planning assumptions have narrowed. Options that used to feel routine now feel conditional. Moves that once carried little political weight now feel exposed. That's not a failure you can announce. It's one you work around, and working around a constraint is the same as accepting it. This is why Romania's approach is so effective. It doesn't force Russia to respond emotionally, it forces it to respond mathematically. Every action now has to be justified against a quieter, more resilient backdrop that absorbs pressure instead of magnifying it. Over time, that math stops favoring persistence, not because Russia runs out of weapons, but because it runs out of clean moves. And when a pressure strategy reaches that point, it doesn't collapse. It just loses its edge. It becomes slower, more predictable, and easier to manage. That's the real shift underway. Not confrontation, not dominance, constraint. And once a constraint settles into planning culture, it doesn't go away when headlines change. It becomes the new normal. This is where the Danube stops being a story about Romania and starts being a story about time. Russia entered this war believing pressure could be layered faster than resistance could organize. That belief shaped everything, from how it used drones and missiles to how it threatened escalation without committing to it. The assumption was simple: if you keep pushing, the system on the other side eventually bends. The Danube is proving the opposite.